apparently I'm on some sort of superpower shonen kick. So, going back through this stuff I watched in my youth, I seem to remember watching Scryed and making AMVs out of it. One was the Did My Time by Korn, and the other one was Taking Over Me by Evanescence, and no, I ain't proud. Look, mistakes were made. May as well put it on my tombstone at this point. But yes, I was picking up Scryed disc by disc as it came out, and now looking back at it some 12 years later, I kind of wonder why. This may seem odd to you because I actually rather enjoyed myself going through it again, but there are some rather major and glaring flaws in it. Consider, however, that way back when, if you started in on a show that wasn't super hot, you were already spending at least $30 on it. Maybe $60 if two discs were out at the same time. This is the same thing that happened to me with Silent Mobius, incidentally, and that's a story for another day. This was back in the days before streaming, mind you, so you just kinda had to go with it. Whether this means I tricked myself into liking it or it was actually good is up for debate, but it is also important to consider that we had a really hard filter on the stuff that came over here back in the early and mid-aughts, because companies were a lot less willing to go in on something they weren't sure was going to sell. Pressing DVDs and Blu-rays don't cost $1, kids. Now that we have streaming as a viable alternative, anime distribution companies can be a little less choosy with what they bring stateside. So at that point, even if a show wasn't super great, there was at least a modicum of quality to it, as far as I remember. So I let myself get caught up in reminiscing about Scryed and kind of forgot to explain what the show is. Man, getting old is hard. Scryed follows two principal characters, Kazuma and Ryuho, and their various cohorts and followers. They're both alter users, which is like stands but with actual physical forms created from the matter around them. Alters take on all sorts of shapes and sizes, but the ones with actual design behind them are the ones to pay attention to. Kazuma is an alter user living in the Lost Ground, which is a mountainous region in the middle of Japan that just sort of busted out of the ground 22 years prior. It's basically a Fist of the North Star style area with nothing really to speak of aside from rocks and ruin. Makes living there kind of hard, as you might imagine. Kazuma is a gun for hire. Fist for hire? Gun, fist for hire? He goes around beating up people into paste for money to help take care of a 10-year-old girl named Konami. At least he has a good sense not to have a complex about wanting to fuck her, but he does get super protective. His altar is a claw-like set of armor that appears on his arm and spikes his hair up, and lets him launch rocket punch-like attacks. They also let him break physics by punching the ground to get some mad ups, but you don't watch a show like this for its deep understanding of mass and momentum. His opposite number, Ryuho, is a member of the organization of altar cops called Holy, in all caps. His character design should give you a big hint as to what his nature is, and if you guessed weapons-grade dickbag, you were right. He's the stoic counter to Kazuma's brash nature, and his alter Zetsue looks like a dude in bondage gear who's super fast and has these weird whip things on his shoulders. Of course, it transforms into this bizarre creature that moves like lightning and looks like a Tyranid Raffiner from Warhammer, or a Hydralisk if you're a pleb. Ryuho is a real hardliner for order and justice, or so he claims, and Kazuma is all about freedom and chaos to an extent. Ryuho is from a rich family and thinks he knows what's up, and most of the other high-ranking members of Holy are kind of in that vein. There are a lot more class issues in the world of Scryed than you would have really expected, so be warned. A lot of the native alters who join Holy rather than get shipped off to God knows where end up scared to death to lose their position because they're really only able to do one thing, which is fight to uphold the social structure. For example, Asuka Tachibana, whose power is balls.
What the? Impossible! My balls aren't there!
What's wrong? You can't find your little balls? I've got them right here.
Is a clear example of the way Holy exploits its talented people to its own end. Meanwhile, Kazuma exists outside of this class structure. He experiences what could be called quote-unquote true freedom in that he's not actually beholden to anyone, but he's constantly impoverished and hungry and is probably functionally illiterate. Anyway, they sync up pretty well with Naruto and Sasuke or Goku and Vegeta in that shonen-style show way, because of course they do. It's red Oni, blue Oni. You see this all the time. Their initial confrontation is somewhat anticlimactic, but they get progressively more heated and violent as it goes on. Kazuma really has it in for Ryuho, and it's hard to blame him for hating this smug son of a bitch. The two cross paths several times over the first half of the show, the two immediately at odds because Ryuho wants the native alters to submit to Holy's rule and Kazuma says fuck that noise. And I am oversimplifying things a fair bit, but by the time they hit the middle of the series, their conflict is literally earth-shattering. And I don't mind telling you, Kazuma gets the short end of the stick in this show. There's a fair bunch of character quote-unquote upgrades, but Ryoho starts out the gate with one. And when Kazuma gets on some sort of vision quest to go and get his upgrade, he ends up all sorts of fucked up. By the time we meet back with him after the mid-season break, he's lost most of the use of his right arm, and his right eye is gone, except when he has his alter on. The entire right half of his body is basically given up so he can have more alter power. All Ryuho loses are his memories, apparently in an attempt to make him look like a more sympathetic character. But considering that Kazuma has lost many of his friends, function in parts of his body, and what little home he had, I don't really call that even. Kazuma has to work twice as hard to get what Ryuho starts out with. Just think about that as the show goes on. Incidentally, I don't really think this is what the creator of the series had in mind when he made it, but it's kind of hard not to miss. The rest of the cast of Scryed is full of oddballs, like the fat dude who shouts hammer at the top of his lungs all the time, and the other fat dude who has a thing for watermelons, and the blue-haired girl with the water powers, and the other blue-haired girl with the heal powers, I think? They're like low-rent X-Men, but they're not really characters so much as means to an end. The show veers towards a Monster of the Week sort of thing by about the 10th episode and doesn't really trickle off until the end. And while this is perfectly fine for keeping a show going week to week, the plot doesn't really advance heavily until we get a big dump at the end of the show. They sprinkle in bits with Mimori Kiryu, who is our designated plot mover, but couldn't that have been done by someone a little less passive? I'm a big proponent of active characters, and Mimori doesn't have an alter, and she doesn't really even get damseled, she just kind of exists by the midpoint of the series. She gets busted out and starts playing Doctor in the Lost Ground, but by the time the show starts wrapping up, she's either doing narration or just going, Ryuho, no! Look, we've already got one character who does that, damn it. That character is Sherry Sajani, who is cute and has blue hair and is voiced by Lara Jo Miller. She's an alter user too, but we don't see her alter for most of the show until it really, really matters, and then she's out of the show for reasons. But she follows Ryuho around like a puppy dog, which is cute but kind of irritating because she's pretty well got no personality otherwise. Apparently she was some sort of scrappy kid back before she got tamed by Holy, which is kind of annoying. But she's got the hots for Ryuho, and he's oblivious because he's Ryuho, and he's only got eyes for Kazuma. Hey, don't laugh, you know people ship it. Somewhere around the point of the mid-season break, the show remembers that it needed to have a main antagonist, and it comes in the form of Kyoji Mujo, who does an impeccable impression of a human being for something that is clearly a pile of garbage in a people costume. Detestable as he is, he does provide a big bad for Kazuma and Ryuho to square off against, because otherwise they'd just spend the rest of the series squaring off against each other. I'm sure after they take care of that guy, they'll be friends, though. Never mind. Mujo's ultimate goal is to use the power of the dimension that alter powers come from to take over the lost ground, which is kind of small-minded of him, but he's pretty nuts and seems to have little concern for human life. Callous villains are the easiest to punch in the face, and it becomes exceptionally satisfying to see it happen. So, a few notes, overall. If you look at this and suddenly have Gundam Seed flashbacks, you're not wrong, it's the same character designer. And that means it has the same face issues all over it. Take that how you will. Also, if a character's name shows up in the title of an episode, I think there's probably about a 50-50 shot they'll die horribly at the end of it. I will say this, the show is very colorful, but the animation goes to shit real fast. There's a lot of recycled animation, and the fighting, while interesting, doesn't really have a whole ton going on. When this show moves, it moves, but it takes a hot minute for them to really get underway. The plot is sort of a secondary consideration, which I usually say is unforgivable, but I let it slide in this case. Now, I credit this to the series being just so peculiar out of the gate that anything really goes. So when you're watching this, you kind of just have to sort of hang on for the ride. You don't watch a show like this for the plot, you dig? The dub is pretty good for its time, featuring Stephen J. Bloom as Kazuma, Crispin Freeman, Michelle Ruff, Lara Jo Miller, and a lot of other familiar voices from Digimon and Cowboy Bebop. The whole thing is pretty much average on that end, and while the familiar voices are nice, the script is just okay, and they're putting in work. You know that face you make when you can't really find the right words to describe something, but it's not awful and it's not great? That's where Scryed is for me. The thing of it is that Scryed is better than a whole bunch of things, but it's also straddling that line where you can see the early bits of the kind of weirdness that we have in recent years on it. Maybe it didn't have much in the way of lasting impact, but people liked it at the time, and I think people going into it for the first time will enjoy it, even if the color palette may burn the eye a little bit. There's a lot of CG rainbows in this one, folks. I will say that going into the latter half of the series, they really doubled down on the stock footage, and for those of us who binge watch our anime, that being most of us at this point, I would assume, that can get a little frustrating. It may be damning with faint praise, but you can pretty easily just fast forward through a lot of the later episodes because the series is simple enough that you've already got the gist of the characters just by looking at them. It's got a lot of flaws, but it's got a lot of charm to it too, and I think that charm is better than the flaws that it has. I'd say a solid 8 on 10 at the high side, and it's probably about a 6.5 or a 7 at the worst. Scryed is definitely shonen flavored fare for people who don't have a ton of time to invest and still want the high spots. It's got plenty of low spots too, but what are you going to do? Good, not great, solid, not gold. I'd still rather watch it than Big Order again, that's for damn sure. The showrunners were clearly not concerned with selling body pillows instead of making a good, if only above average series. I shudder to think how this series would end up if it was made nowadays. Ugh. I don't precisely know how you might go about picking it up in our modern era since it's not streaming right now, but I'm certain a determined soul might find the discs out there without too much effort. And if you want to put in the time, I think Scryed will give you what you're looking for, but then I list Busou Renkin as one of my favorite anime, so the hell do I know.